Okay, think about this for a second. Imagine you're a doctor, right? You're not making a diagnosis based on just one thing.
No way. You'd be looking at everything.
Exactly. Patient history, lab results, maybe scans, notes. You're pulling together all these different kinds of data, different modalities, as they call it.
And that's just how experts work, isn't it? Especially in complex fields, they naturally combine different information streams.
But here's the thing with a lot of AI systems today. They might be amazing at, say, analyzing one type of data, or even if they use multiple types. Well, they often end up being these black boxes.
Right. You get an answer, but you've no idea how it got there.
None at all. You can't see the steps. You can't tell what was important. And if you're talking about really critical decisions like in medicine or finance or, safety engineering, that lack of clarity is a huge problem.
It's a trust issue. Fundamentally, you can't verify it. You can't easily fix it if it's wrong.
Precisely. And this tension, needing AI that's powerful enough for complex multi-source data, but also needing to understand how it's reasoning. That's exactly what the research we're digging into today tackles.
Yeah, it's a really active area. So this paper we're looking at is called A Step Towards Interpretable Multimodal AI Models with Multifex. It's by Mafalda Malafia and colleagues.
Multifix. Okay. And the idea is it combines different data types, so it's multimodal.
While also aiming to make the whole process interpretable, so you can actually follow the logic.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack this paper, get to grips with Multifix, what it is, how it works, what the researchers found out about, how well it performs and how clear its reasoning actually is.
And also where the challenges still lie. What are the limitations? It's about giving you the key insights into this specific approach to explainable AI, or XAI.
A shortcut to understanding the cutting edge.
Yeah.
And they focus specifically on combining image data and tabular data, right?
That's right, which is a very common combination. Think medical records. You've got scans, that's image data, plus lab tests and patient stats, which is tabular data, or even manufacturing sensor readings alongside visual checks.
Okay. So we know interpretability is important, but why is it especially challenging when you're mixing different data types like this?
Well, it adds layers of complexity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're not just trying to peek inside one model. You're trying to understand how different models may be processing very different kinds of information, then talk to each other, or how their findings get combined.
Like understanding a committee's decision versus just one person's thought process.
That's a great analogy, yeah. You need to know not just the final vote, but who argued what, based on what evidence, and how they reached consensus. Transparency lets humans check the logic, maybe tweak the model, or even learn something new from the patterns the AI finds.
Right. It's about trust, verification, and even discovery. Okay, so tell us about Multifix itself. What's the core idea?
So Multifix stands for Multimodal Feature Engineering Approach to Explainable AI. And the name kind of gives it away. The key is in the feature engineering. Instead of just feeding everything into one big, opaque model.
The black box approach.
Right. Multifix tries to first process each type of data separately, extract some key distinct features from each, then combine those features in a way that's easier to understand, sort of building interpretability in from the architecture, not just tacking it on afterwards.
Building it in, I like that. How does that actually look in practice? What's the pipeline?
Okay, so imagine you have your inputs, an image and a corresponding row of tabular data. First, they go into separate feature engineering blocks, one designed for images, one for tabular data.
Makes sense. Different tools for different data types.
Exactly. And initially, these blocks often use deep learning, maybe a CNN, a convolutional neural network for the image.
Standard for image processing, yeah.
And maybe a simpler MLP, a multi-layer perceptron for the tabular data. These are good at finding complex patterns and extracting relevant info.
Okay, still sounds a bit like black boxes at this stage, though, using deep learning.
But here's the first crucial twist for interpretability. Multifix introduces what they call a sparse feature engineering bottleneck.
A bottleneck, meaning it restricts something.
Precisely. Even though those deep learning models might learn loads of internal representations, Multifix forces them to output only a very small, limited number of features for each modality.
So small.
In the paper's experiments, they often limited it to, say, a maximum of 3 features per modality.
Wait, 3 features from a whole image? That sounds incredibly tight. Wouldn't you lose a ton of important information? How does that?
It's a fair question, and yes, it's a major constraint. The justification is purely for the sake of interpretability later on. If you only have, say, 3 numbers representing the key info from the image and 3 from the tabular data, understanding how those 6 numbers combine to make a final decision is vastly simpler than trying to track thousands of interacting values.
Ah, okay. So the bottleneck is deliberately sacrificing some potential complexity or nuance from the deep learning part to make the next stage manageable for human understanding.
Exactly, it's a trade-off. And the experiments aim to see if you could still get good performance despite this bottleneck. Spoilers.
Hmm.
Often, you could.
Interesting. Okay, so you have these few distilled features from each modality. What happens next? How are they combined?
They go into a fusion block. Multifix uses what's called an intermediate fusion strategy. Meaning the features are extracted first, then they're combined. It's not like early fusion where you just mash the raw data together at the start, or late fusion where you train completely separate models and only combine their final predictions at the very end.
And because you only have those few bottleneck features.
Analyzing this intermediate fusion step becomes much more feasible.
Got it. Feature extraction with a bottleneck, then fusion. Now, the crucial part, how does this become explainable? You still mentioned deep learning earlier.
Right. This is where the second key step happens. After the initial training phase, where the deep learning models learn the features, the fusion block learns how to combine them, parts of this system get either explained or critically replaced.
Replaced.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the image features, because even those bottleneck features from a CNN can be a bit abstract, they often use post hoc explanation methods, like GradCam.
Yeah, GradCam gives you those heat maps on the image showing where the model was looking.
Exactly. It provides visual evidence which pixels or regions contributed most to a feature or the final output. It gives you some insight into the CNN part.
Okay, so visual clues for the image side. What about the tabular features and that fusion block?
This is where multifix gets really interesting, I think. For the tabular features and for the fusion block, the part that actually combines image and tabular info, they often replace the initial deep learning model entirely.
Replace it with what?
With an interpretable symbolic expression. They use genetic programming, specifically a tool called GPGOMEA in this paper, to generate it. Genetic programming. That's the AI technique that evolves computer programs or like mathematical formulas, right?
Exactly. GP searches for and evolves a relatively simple mathematical formula, or maybe a set of logical if-then rules. This formula takes the values of those bottleneck features, the few numbers from the image block and the tabular block as its input.
And outputs the final prediction.
Yes. And the beauty of it is the resulting formula is inherently transparent. You can literally read it. If image feature 1.5, Andy, tabular feature 2.3, then predict class A, that kind of thing.
Wow, okay. So you swap out the potentially complex, opaque neural network in the fusion stage for an actual readable equation or rule set.
Precisely.
Right.
This gives you a direct white box model for that crucial combination step, and potentially for the tabular feature extraction too. It avoids relying only on post hoc explanations like GradCam, which try to explain a black box and can sometimes be a bit misleading or incomplete.
That makes a lot of sense. The bottleneck simplifies the inputs so that the genetic programming can find a transparent model to handle them. The pieces fit together.
That's the idea. And the paper also looked into various ways to train this whole pipeline end-to-end, sequentially, using pre-trained parts, showing it's quite a flexible framework.
Okay, framework understood. Now let's get to the results. Did it actually work? How did they test it?
Right, the experiments. They created several synthetic data sets. The goal wasn't real-world complexity yet, but controlled environments to really test the multimodal logic.
So simple images.
Yeah, images with basic shapes, circles, rectangles, triangles, with some noise added.
Yeah.
And the tabular data was just, 10 numerical features.
And the trick was making the combination matter.
Exactly. They designed problems where you had to use info from both the image and the table to get the right answer. Like, the answer is true only if there's a circle in the image and if, say, tabular feature 1 is greater than feature 2.
Ah, like logical gates, AND, XOR, but using these mixed data types.
Precisely. They tested AND logic, XOR logic, which is trickier, a more complex multi-feature problem needing multiple conditions, and also a multi-class problem with 4 possible outputs. They were pretty rigorous, used cross-validation, tuned to that bottleneck size.
Okay, first big question. Did multifix actually perform better than just looking at images alone or tables alone? Was combining them worth it?
Oh, absolutely. That was a clear finding. Across the board, in all these different logic problems, multifix using its various training strategies generally performed much better, often significantly better, than models trained on only images or only tabular data.
And they used balanced accuracy?
Yes, balance accuracy or BAC,
Yeah.
which is good because it accounts for imbalanced classes situations where one outcome is much rarer than others, like in medical diagnosis. It gives a fairer picture than just raw accuracy.
So, point proven.
Yeah.
Combining modalities helps performance here. What about the different ways they train multifix? Did one strategy stand out?
Interestingly, while some strategies, like the hybrid or end-to-end ones, often had slightly higher average BAC scores, the statistical tests didn't always show a significant difference between the different multimodal strategies themselves,
Meaning?
meaning the best specific training approach might depend more on the exact problem, or maybe what pre-trained models you already have available. The core multimodal structure was the main benefit.
Okay, performance boost confirmed. But now, the real test. Interpretability. Could they actually understand how multifix was solving these problems? Let's get into the examples.
This is where it gets really insightful. Let's take that A and D problem again. Predict true only if you see a circle A and D tabular feature by 1 is greater than by 2. Multifix learned this.
And the final model was literally an A&D formula.
Yes, the GP part generated a symbolic expression that effectively implemented that image feature and tabular feature logic. But here's something fascinating they found about those intermediate bottleneck features. Sometimes the deep learning part, learning the tabular feature, didn't actually learn a feature correlating with I1 by 2. It learned one correlating with the opposite by 1 by 2.
Seriously, it learned the inverse.
It did. But, and this is the crucial part, the symbolic expression found by the genetic programming was smart enough to figure this out. If the feature it received was inverted, the formula would adjust. Maybe instead of feature 1 A and D feature 2, it learned feature 1 A and D not feature 2, or use some other logic that achieved the same overall A and D behavior.
Wow. So the system found an equivalent but different way to get the right answer, and because the final step was transparent, you could actually see that happening.
Exactly. You could see the image attention map, see what the tabular feature correlated with, even if inverted, and then read the final symbolic logic that correctly combined them. A total black box would just give you the right answer, hiding this internal detour.
That's incredibly cool. And did making it interpretable hurt performance in this case?
For the A&D problem, the performance of the final interpretable model was virtually identical to the initial partly black box model. So transparency without a performance hit there.
Okay, what about XOR? That's always a tough one. Neither input alone tells you anything.
Right. XOR demands true integration. Multifix managed to learn the XOR logic too. And again, they saw instances where the intermediate features learned by the deep learning parts were inverted.
And the GP fixed it again?
Yep. The final symbolic expression adapted, maybe learning logic like predict true if the binarized bottleneck features are equal instead of unequal, effectively performing XOR even with inverted inputs.
Okay, makes sense. How is the performance for the interpretable XOR model?
Now, this is really surprising. In some of the XOR experiments, the final interpretable model generated by multifix actually performed better than the initial deep learning model it was derived from.
Better. Interpretability improved performance.
Yeah. They saw increases in balance accuracy like 0.035 higher in one case they reported.
Hang on. That goes against the usual narrative, doesn't it? Usually there's a trade-off. More interpretability means less performance.
It totally does. It suggests that, at least for this kind of problem, the explicit structured logic discovered by the genetic programming for the fusion step might actually be more robust or generalized slightly better than the complex, entangled weights of the neural network it replaced. It's a really powerful observation.
That is powerful. Okay, what about the more complex multi-feature problem? 2 image features, 2 tabular features, more complex logic.
That one definitely pushed the boundaries. The tabular features, again, were learned pretty well and represented cleanly by the GP formulas, but the image features got trickier.
How so?
Well, with only, say, 2 bottleneck features trying to capture information about both circles and triangles, present or absent, each single feature ended up representing a sort of mixed concept. Like, feature 1 might be high if there's a circle, but no triangle, low otherwise.
So it wasn't just circleness anymore, it was a combined state.
Exactly. Which made interpreting those specific intermediate image features using GradCam more challenging. You couldn't easily point and say, this feature means circle. And consequently, the final symbolic fusion expression from GP also became deeper, more complex, harder to read at a glance than for A&D or XOR.
So complexity starts to strain the intuitive interpretability, even if the model is technically transparent.
It seems so. Performance was still decent, similar to the black box version, But it highlighted that interpreting features from complex modalities like images, especially through a tight bottleneck encoding multiple things, is still a challenge. And the resulting symbolic logic can grow less intuitive.
Right. And the multi-class problem, predicting one of four categories.
That also showed interesting results. Similar to XOR, the final interpretable model from multifix, in some configurations, showed substantially higher predictive power than the initial black box model.
Wow, again, by how much?
They reported improvements, like a 0.075 increase in balanced accuracy. Quite significant. The GP found symbolic logic using piecewise rules like IF image features this, AND tabular features that, then class 1, LSE IF. That worked really well.
Okay, so wrapping up the experiments. Multi-fix definitely shows value in combining modalities for performance. It can generate interpretable models, especially for the fusion step using GP. We can see how it reasons, even discovering surprising equivalent logic. And sometimes, maybe counterintuitively, this interpretable version can even outperform the black box.
That's a great summary. It really does position multifix as a novel step. It tries to get the best of both worlds. Deep learning's power for feature extraction, GP's transparency for reasoning, especially with tabular data and the crucial fusion step. That bottleneck and the replace-explain strategy are key design choices for interpretability.
And having that direct symbolic model for fusion feels much more solid than just trying to explain away a complex black box after the fact.
Definitely. But we need to be clear about the limitations, which the paper acknowledges. This was tested on synthetic data. The big next step is real-world validation. Complex medical data, industrial data, maybe more than two modalities.
Right. Real-world messiness. And as the multi-feature example showed, interpreting those intermediate features, especially from images when they encode complex states, is still hard. GradCam helps, but it's not perfect. Maybe we need more inherently interpretable image feature methods.
It's an ongoing research area. And also, as problems get more complex, even if the GP formula is technically readable, it can become really long and convoluted, not exactly easy to grasp intuitively.
So finding simpler formulas that are still accurate is another goal.
Yeah, maybe using things like multi-objective optimization in GP, aiming for both accuracy and simplicity. And finally, even with transparent model, making it truly useful for, say, a doctor or an engineer.
Requires better tools.
Exactly. More intuitive visualizations, ways to interactively probe the model, see how it behaves on specific examples. Bridging that gap between a transparent model and a practical, trustworthy tool is vital.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the core message seems to be that multifix is a really promising step towards multimodal AI we can actually understand. It demonstrates you can combine different data effectively and get a window into the reasoning, especially strong on the tabular and fusion parts.
Absolutely. And it highlights that constant tension, doesn't it, between raw predictive power and our need for transparency, for trust, especially when the stakes are high. Multifix is one attempt to find a better balance point.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Given that systems like multifix can sometimes find these unexpected but valid logical paths, like those inverted features, and can occasionally even perform better when made interpretable.
How might it change things if we started designing AI systems, especially in critical fields like medicine, by prioritizing this kind of explicit, interpretable feature engineering and symbolic reasoning right from the start, instead of just building black boxes and trying to explain them later?
How could that fundamentally change our ability to trust AI, to debug it, and maybe even to discover new knowledge from it? Something to think about next time you interact with an AI system. Ask yourself, could I understand how it reached its conclusion?